What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9 coming back to you with another Star Wars Unlimited tournament video here. This is the third round of the group phase for me, and I am up against Squall, aka Prairie Pirates, a person that I'm familiar with from the Star Wars Legion community, where I think we played in some of the same events online, and including an event that I was running that Prairie Pirates participated in. And yeah, we're gonna get right to it here. So I'm playing that same Cunning Sabine, and my opponent is playing Boba, Boba Command. So I lead off by playing a Green Squadron A-Wing, pretty good starting unit. My opponent plays an ISB agent, revealing an event to deal 1 damage to the A-Wing, and also plays Greedo. So pretty good start from my opponent. I have some aggressive stuff as well, but these aggressive early deployments are not what I most want to see when I'm playing an aggro deck. I would prefer for my opponent to be, doing slower stuff, trying to build up or whatever. Okay, so I'm going to play a Fleet Lieutenant here, giving my A-Wing +2 attack and swinging in for 5 total damage, 1 base +2 for the Fleet Lieutenant, plus another 2 for the Raid 2 on that thing, so 5 total damage. Nice chunk of HP. My opponent does the classic ambush Super Laser Technician play. He actually doesn't put the Super Laser Technician in as a resource, but I remind him of that. It's technically a thing that you can miss because it says you may, and even if it didn't say you may, I suspect it would be ruled as a missed trigger and your fault if you don't put it into the resource zone yourself. So kind of unfortunate, but I'm not looking for gotchas. That's not how I like to play this, not even at a tournament. So then my opponent uses the ISB agent to finish off the Fleet Lieutenant, and Greedo is still on the field. Then a probe droid gets deployed here. Taking a look at my hand, I'm going to show 2 Fighters for Freedom and a Surprise Strike. I did take the opportunity to hit the enemy base for 1 damage with Sabine's ability. Greedo hits my base for 3 there. Not loving this situation, quite frankly. I've taken a fair bit of damage here, pretty early on. But it's not as much in terms of the actual damage on the base, but in terms of the board state. My opponent has 2 pretty decently strong units in the ground arena right now, and while my A-wing is doing some damage in the space arena, I don't feel like I have good overall control of the board or overall like aggressive push at this time. Okay, so I lead off this turn by having the A-wing swing in for another 3 damage, just landing those hits, trying to get as much value as possible before it potentially gets hit by some control effect. We could see various things. My opponent gets to deploy Boba this turn. I'm going to counter Boba here with Leia, so Leia gets to exhaust Boba. I'm happy about that at least. Leia Defiant Princess there to cost 2/2. When played, you may choose to either ready a resource or exhaust an enemy unit. So in this case, I'm going to just exhaust Boba. My opponent then plays Boba Disintegrator. I'm going to use Sabine's ability, 1 damage to each base. Still have Greedo and that probe droid to contend with at this time. I do have a copy of Infiltrator Skill in hand, which I can deploy, or I could potentially use that Surprise Strike. As soon as I deploy Sabine, she gets locked down by No Good to Me Dead. So not what I most like to see. I end up deploying the Infiltrator skill actually onto the A-Wing. And the reason is the A-Wing is kind of... So if I put it on Leia, it doesn't matter because Leia can just get killed by one of the 3 or more attack enemy units. If I put it on Sabine, it doesn't matter. She can still be killed in 1 hit by Boba Disintegrator thanks to his on-attack ability. So the most value that I can get out of that is by putting it on Leia. My opponent still hasn't gone with the probe droid, and this I may well be able to get the initiative. So A-Wing, most value I can get from it is on the E-Wing. I might have said Leia there. But the A-Wing is going to get more of an opportunity to attack the enemy base potentially in the future. and so I want to kind of amp that up. The ground arena is looking very bad for me in this game. My opponent has a substantially stronger board in the ground arena. And so the question is whether or not I'm maybe going to be able to pivot to try and achieve a breakthrough in the space arena. So I do have some cool cards here. So I can potentially play the Wing Leader in the Alliance X-Wing. Could potentially use a surprise strike there. I have a fair few options that I can use in the space arena. Um, for some reason, I don't resource here. I'm very confident that's wrong. Like not wrong as in like I didn't do it, but wrong as in that's a plain mistake. I almost certainly should have resourced here. Okay, so we see a surprise strike from Greedo to take out Sabine, and then Greedo misses the top deck to take out Leia as well. I do think that was not necessarily the most efficient way to do it because Boba Disintegrator could kill Sabine in one hit with just the on attack, which would prevent the surprise strike from being used. But I suppose the Greedo play does give that chance of clearing both of my ground units at once. So one thing that I could do here is I could use the wing leader on Leia. Another thing that I could do is just swing. I think if I use the wing leader on Leia, Boba can just defeat her. So I'm just going to have Leia swing in for 2 more damage. Boba Disintegrator then takes out Leia without taking damage thanks to that on attack ability. And now there's not a ton for me to do. It's going to be a wing leader buffing up my A wing yet again. So this A wing is now actually very strong. It has, +3/+3, can already swing for 3 normally, so it can swing for 6 now, and I do still have a surprise strike in hand, so this A-Wing can actually swing for lethal here, a total of 9 damage with the surprise strike. My opponent, meanwhile, has total dominance in the ground arena and is actually beating me on overall base damage, but it isn't going to matter because the surprise strike that I have there is enough to just close out the game. So in this situation, my opponent was doing pretty well in the ground arena, but didn't really have much of anything in space to contest me. And that's left me in a position where I am going to be able to kind of swipe the win out from under him with this surprise strike, whereas the Imperial ground force there would easily be enough to defeat me if not for this. But surprise strike comes in there, so that's 3 +2 for the experience, +1 for the infiltrator's skills. They were at 6, +1 base, +2 for raids. So that's 9. 9 damage is exact lethal, so that's game. Victory for Sabine, despite a tough opening there in the ground arena, was able ultimately to get the win in the space arena. So I am now 1-0 in this match, and we're going to move forward to round 2. If I can win this one, I will have gone undefeated in the group phase, or undefeated in matches, though not in games. I did lose a game to the Chewie deck from earlier. That was yesterday's video. If you want to check that out, I will perhaps link it in the video description below. But that was a that I did end up losing one of those games, but ultimately won that one 2-1. Hoping, of course, for the 3-0, and we'll see how we do here. So sideboarding, I want to put in so I'm swapping out my Starwing Scouts because my opponent is running ISB agent, and I don't want to be running that unit that's so vulnerable to the 1 damage ping. And instead, I'm putting in the Fang Fighters, which have a similar role, slightly worse damage, don't have the card draw effect, do potentially discard upgrades, but more importantly, I'm just running them here to be less vulnerable to pings. And then I believe I put in an extra copy of Shoot First in exchange for a Waylay. I had 1 Shoot First in sideboard, though I think I would probably run that in main deck in a revised version of this rather than having one of them in the sideboard. Not 100% sure on that, but I thought Shoot First was a pretty solid card, and yeah, it's interesting. My initial evaluation of Shoot First was pretty low, but I was actually corrected. I was playing with the late night gaming crew, and Shoot First seemed pretty effective there. So I figured, maybe there's something to this. I'll give it a try. I do think that it's still perhaps somewhat overrated. I think the thing about Shoot First is that like sometimes people look at it and they're like, "Oh, this is a great removal card and it only costs 1." And I think that you should consider it to cost 1 and exhaust a unit because you're using your unit's attack to play to do the Shoot First in a way that you wouldn't like so let's say you might say, oh shoot, I can if I could use let's say I have a fleet lieutenant and my opponent plays an Emperor's Royal Guard and I want to take it out. I have a 3/3 and my opponent has a 3/4. So you could say, oh, you play shoot first and take it out for one, or you play open fire and take it out for three. Shoot first is way more efficient. In a sense, shoot first is more efficient, but it's important to note that with open fire, your unit would still be able to attack because it wouldn't have spent its attack on delivering the shoot first. So that's a way in which that card is maybe not quite as good as it's sometimes evaluated, but I still do think it's a very good card. Okay, so here we are resourcing. So I'm looking at probably a Greedo start here. So I've resourced this Wing Leader. Wing Leader is a really good card, and I normally wouldn't resource it. I resourced it here because with Greedo, the Wing Leader doesn't work because he's not a rebel. Um, I think it might have been good to keep it anyway, though, just to be in a good position for Sabine, to use the Wing Leader on Sabine herself. On the other hand, against No Good to Be Dead, maybe that wouldn't work out. So on turn one here, my opponent plays Greedo. I then ping with Sabine. The reason for this is I want my opponent to either take the initiative or pass. If my opponent passes, it might signal an ISB agent. If my opponent takes the initiative, even if there is an ISB agent, it won't be able to be used. My opponent trades Greedos with me. Seems pretty reasonable, quite frankly. So here I can either go Lothal Insurgent or go for the Fang Fighter. I'm going to ping with Sabine first. I'm trying to kind of stall here and see where my opponent's going. Maybe deploy to the arena where my opponent isn't. So my opponent brings out Boba Disintegrator here, and I'm going to respond by playing the Fang Fighter because the Lothal Insurgent is no match for Boba Disintegrator. So I'm going to just kind of focus on the safer arena here to try to push that damage through. My opponent takes the initiative, and we're on to the next turn. So this is an odd spot. Boba Disintegrator is a really efficient unit and actually a big problem for me. He can kill Sabine in one hit if she's exhausted first. So I'm hoping that Boba Disintegrator will somehow attack or otherwise become exhausted or whatever before I deploy Sabine so that I don't potentially get blown out. Um, One good thing about Sabine is that when you do have to stall, you can use her ability to stall while still doing an action, and not showing your opponent that you're passing. I think passing often makes someone think like, "What's up?" But stalling with like things that you would otherwise do is different. So in this case, my opponent plays a waylay, sends my Sabling Fang Fighter back to hand. I'm going to use Sabine's ability. My opponent then swings with Boba. I'm happy to see this because it means that I can now deploy without having the chance of Boba picking my stuff off. I deploy Greedo. I could have deployed Greedo there and just with Boba not exhausted and seeing whether or not my opponent was going to swing at Greedo, which is a possibility. I don't entirely know what's happening here. Oh yeah, this is what's going on here. Yeah, so I was gonna play the Fang Fighter and then attack and then use Sabine and attack, but I asked my opponent if it was okay for me to change that because I realized that I would actually rather use the Fleet Lieutenant here for the bonus damage directly to the base with Sabine. I don't think Sabine is likely gonna last that long. And my opponent may be able to take things over in the ground arena, so I'm trying to just like get results there as much as possible before that occurs. Might be an erroneous idea, I'm not entirely sure. So this turn, what I probably want to do is play the Falcon and play Sabine Wren Explosives Artist. Plus attack as much as possible with my units in the ground arena into the enemy base. Boba deploys this turn, which is a big problem for me. We could also see a overwhelming barrage this turn, which could also be a big problem for me. Overall, I wish I were in a stronger spot here in terms of having done early damage. But on the plus side, I do still have a lot of units. I outnumber my opponent substantially in the ground arena. The one unit my opponent has, Boba Disintegrator, is significantly more powerful than the ones that I have there. But I am not in a terrible position because I do just outnumber him enough that if he doesn't have other things that are going to cause me some trouble, those units should be able to push a fair amount of damage through. I mean, if we assume that my opponent has no sentinels or no other removal this turn, I could do potentially 6 to 9 damage, depending on what happens with Boba Disintegrator. But that's not to be because here we have Overwhelming Barrage hitting for 5, going to defeat Greedo, defeat the Fleet Lieutenant, 1 damage to Sabine, and I miss my Greedo top deck that could have done 2 damage to Boba. Um, Under the circumstances, it seems like Boba can now easily defeat Sabine. I don't really have any recourse for that. So it seems like maybe the best thing for me to do is to just have Sabine attack the enemy base directly, get 3 damage in that I would otherwise lose. Not what I most want to see here, but we're gonna swing on in with Sabine. 3 more damage to the enemy base, down to 11 life, 14 to go. Sabine indeed defeated by Boba, though this does entail Boba taking 2 damage. At this point, I actually start lagging really badly. So I was in a I was in a rural area in the Czech Republic when I was participating in this tournament, and my internet was very inconsistent. I was at it wasn't like I was in a tent in the woods. I was actually at a place that used to be a pretty nice hotel. Um, and so it wasn't like some horrible deprivation, but the internet there wasn't too good. So I am notably lagging here, and we might see some odd movements and so on. So PP deploys Boba and hits my base. Also stands up some resources with that attack since units were removed earlier. I'm going to deploy Sabine Explosives Artist. We then see a recruit searching the top 5 cards. I'm going to just take the initiative. It's to do 11 damage. My opponent gets a Fetz Fire Spray. Not a unit that I'm particularly excited about having to deal with, quite frankly. The good news is with the initiative, Sabine Explosives Artist is going to be able to attack the enemy base for 3 damage. The Falcon can then, if it's not dealt with, we'll see what my opponent does, but if it does end up being a let's play Fetz Fire Spray type situation, the Falcon could then attack before the Fire Spray clears it, so that's another 3 damage. So that could be 6 damage, which actually leaves the enemy base on 20 life, at which point it's in Surprise Strike range if I were to draw a Surprise Strike with almost any unit. So, it could be worse. Could be a lot better too, but could be worse. Okay, so I have the initiative here, and I'm just going to lead in with an attack from Sabine on the enemy base. Boba Disintegrator defeats Sabine without taking any damage, but Sabine doing her job here, landing damage on the enemy base. That's kind of. Oh, and I'm exhausting there. That's a resource to pay for the Falcon, which I had forgotten to initially do. So Falcon can swing in for 3. Falcon swings in for 3. Fetz Fire Split. Fetz Fire Spray is played now. So I can potentially win this game by just using. Um, I can potentially win this game by using the shoot first that I have in hand with the Falcon, and just using Sabine's ability for 1 more damage. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use Leia Organa Defiant Princess to exhaust Fet's Fire Spray. And then that will put me in a position where next turn I can potentially make that attack with the Falcon and win the game if I can use the shoot first and then use Sabine's ability, or if I can draw a surprise strike to just win immediately. That seems like it could be a pretty solid option for me. So I'm going to lag horribly while I'm doing this. I think I might actually disconnect and reconnect here. But what I'm trying to do is play Leia Organa Defiant Princess, exhaust Fet's Fire Spray, and therefore be in a position where I will be able to have the Falcon. Then, will my opponent take initiative? Will they use Boba? If Prairie Pirates were to use Boba Fett in that situation, it would allow me to take the initiative, and that would put me in a good spot. So we've sort of unlagged a bit here. Exhausting Fett's Fire Spray. One other thing is I can potentially use Sabine this turn for that one extra damage, but ideally I would take the initiative to allow the bigger attack to go through when I don't have an opportunity to when my opponent won't have an opportunity to take the initiative and stop me first. Yeah, so I'm actually disconnecting and reconnecting here because of substantial lag, I think. Um, so just a few thoughts more broadly while we do this. Green Boba is actually relatively good against Sabine as far as decks go. So a lot of decks, if they aren't prepared for Sabine in particular, will just get like destroyed. Like it won't even be close. Sabine can just, rip your deck to pieces, not literally, but I think it's not that uncommon for Sabine to win the game before people deploy their leader, or on the same turn they deploy their leader without their leader doing anything. The aggro is just really strong, but Boba has some good tools for fighting against it. Especially if you manage to ramp him and get him out early. Boba Disintegrator is a great early game unit, can pose a big problem for the opponent. And there's some other stuff that's quite relevant also. Um, so Boba, I think, has also the resources that he can gain from defeating units. It's relatively easy to do that with the cheap units that Sabine likes to play. So here, yeah, so here what happens is my opponent attacks with Boba and defeats Sabine. I then use Sabine's ability to get in position for the one-hit kill. My opponent takes the initiative. And I then deploy the Fang Fighter. I actually think that I misplayed this. I think I should have just taken the initiative after Boba defeated Leia. I think I should have just taken the initiative. At that point, I would be able to do the shoot first, start of the turn, get the 4 damage, and then I can use Sabine's ability on the next turn. I don't have to deploy the Fang Fighter immediately. But, at the time I'm thinking, this is still a really good position for me to be in. I have an overwhelming advantage here with these units, but we see another overwhelming barrage here. That was a problem earlier, and it's a problem here because 7 damage from overwhelming barrage is enough to wipe out both of my units. So I'm not going to be able to swing in for that big hit that I was hoping was going to close out the game. And my opponent here actually has quite a bit of damage. I use Sabine's ability. The Yeah, there is a potentially a big problem for me here. So I take 4 damage there. Um, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try and sneak in there. But at this point, my opponent has basically won the game, and I'm sort of relying on my opponent to make a misplay, because all he has to do here is attack me with Fet's Fire Spray and then potentially take the initiative. So if he attacks with Fet's Fire Spray, I take 7 damage, I'm at 23. I then have to use Jeddah City in order to debuff Boba, so that I don't immediately lose, and my opponent can then take the initiative and hit me with Fet's Fire Spray to win the game. So that is a very bad spot for me to be in. Um, and yeah, this is not where I want to be right now, and we're gonna see whether how it ends up going. My opponent attacks with Fet's Fire Spray, 7 damage. I am going to indeed use Jeddah City on Boba Disintegrator here. So his attack gets -4, brings him down to 0. So my opponent could take the initiative here and would basically just win the game, but instead goes for a risky play with Energy Conversion Lab Greedo, hitting my 1 unit for 3, and if he hits the top deck, it'll kill it, but he misses the top deck. And so I just take the initiative here. I am very happy to have the initiative. And if my opponent doesn't have some way to do that last point of damage, I can just attack the base with that. I can just attack the base with that rogue operative and win. And he's considering his options. He does have two resources, so we could see like no good to me dead, exhausting that unit for next turn. We could see an ISB agent reveal a event, and that would kill my unit. Um, but those options are just not. I don't think they're forthcoming here. So my rogue operative is going to be able to sneak in there through the mighty Imperial forces and blow up the base for the win. So that was an interesting game. I actually think that both myself and my opponent misplayed this end game, and it ultimately ended up with me able to me able to kind of sneak it out. So my opponent plays an ISB agent, but unfortunately for him, it doesn't have an event that would allow him to do the one damage. And then, yeah, so we're just sort of talking it through. So then, yeah, my rogue operative can attack into the enemy base, deal 4 damage thanks to raid 2, and close out the game. But on my earlier point, I misplayed the previous turn, so I should have not used Sabine's ability on the previous turn. Then this turn, I could shoot first the Falcon into the base, and then immediately win with Sabine's ability. But instead, my opponent got the opportunity to use that barrage, clear the Falcon and the Fang Fighter. I had sort of thought if I deployed another unit, I would be safe, but the barrage meant that both of those units could be defeated with one card. And if I had gone for the shoot first on the Falcon into the Sabine ability to win the game, it would have gone better for me. Now, there is some chance my opponent could have won even with that version. So, for instance, if I did the shoot first Falcon, opponent goes down to 1 life, but then plays Colonel Yularen, that would be a situation where he could heal out of the potential lethal and then potentially hit me hard on this turn. Maybe I would have been able to play out other stuff and survive with him maybe attacking my units or me using Jeddah City to remain alive or whatever it is. I'm not exactly sure how it would have gone. But I do think that would have been a better, more likely to win route for me to take. However, I ended up going for this line of play instead, which I think was significantly worse as we saw. And luckily for me, though, my opponent made an error going for the risky Greedo ambush instead of just taking the initiative. And just taking the initiative would have won the game for sure there. Whereas the Greedo play wins the game if he top decks an event. Ultimately, he missed it, and the Rogue Operative was able to get the win. So interesting game there. Ultimately, I win this. I win this match 2-0. So that is going to be a win in the last round of the group phase, which was a round robin among several different groups of 4. So I ended up going 3-0, won the group and will advance to the top cut. And tomorrow we will have the next video with the top 8 game, or the top 8 match rather. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to link to my other videos from the tournament in the video description below, and we will also have the uh, deck lists, not just from my list and PrairiePirates lists, but actually all the deck lists from the tournament have been uploaded. So there is a Google Sheets spreadsheet that's in the video description there that you can check out if you want to see what people were playing, both myself and others. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thanks to you all for watching, and we'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.